Easy bridges for Necromunda or Stargrave. I've made these using this stuff. It's a PVC based product. It's basically a beading for the corner of gyprock walls or drywall walls in America. Essentially, I got 2.4 meters of this stuff for $5, I think it was, from Bunnings, a local big box store here. And I've chopped it up and put it together with some zip ties, checker plate, bits and bobs, some granny grading here, and a few posters and some creative painting. And I think the result's pretty awesome. So how about you watch on and see how I make it? Initially, I played around with different sizes of bridge. I cut up a few different sizes and shapes, put them together, and figured out what would work best for your typical game. I thought of things like size of your base, size of, say, a dreadnought or a vehicle that might be crossing it, size of a tank like a Rogal Dawn. I also took into consideration things like how far you could move in a turn. Would you be able to cross the bridge in a single turn, or would you be stuck out there and subject to enemy fire? I ended up with one large bridge that a tank could cross, a medium-sized bridge that dreadnoughts and other things could cross over, and then a couple of other different sizes. Ones that you could dart across in a single turn, get to safety, and others where you'd definitely be stuck out there in the open for at least one turn. I did try and see if I could slot two pieces of the beading together, and they did go together quite well. Unfortunately though, it was only a 30mm gap, and therefore 32mm bases wouldn't fit. So in the end, my hopes of a "you shall not pass" moment were dashed. But that's okay, because the spaces worked out to be about 60mm anyway, and therefore you really couldn't get around another model in a normal skirmish game rule set anyways. After throwing the bridges together, using some styrene sheet as a base support, and some styrene checker plating from Greenstuff World, and granny grading from my local craft supply place, I decided that the bridges need some borders, so I used some obligatory zip ties and this random green stripping I've gotten from somewhere, heaven knows. After that, I added a few severed arms and limbs and grenades and bits and bobs and skulls just to make it look interesting, and then cracked out the obligatory sand and rocks with PVA glue. I used Dulux Duramax plastic clear primer all over both sides, and then on the bottom I sprayed the Duramax granite effect paint just to give it a bit of texture for when I dry brushed it later, so it wasn't just plain black. Afterwards, I came in with the Citadel Chaos Black and sprayed a few coats all over. Once that was done, I cracked out some liquitex in a burnt umber, I believe, and painted all of that as a base for my dry brushing to give a nice dark rusty effect under the metal. This liquitex is an amazing product. I literally did one light coat passing and it just covered so well. Most of their products, I've got to say, are pretty amazing. That said though, later on when I made a wash using liquitex inks and applied it over the dry brushing, a few flecks of metallic paint came up. I just noticed it in the wash. It didn't worry me too much, but I don't know if it was because I didn't wait long enough for the dry brushing to dry, or whether this is just a product of using inks over inks. After dry brushing to quite a bright silver effect, I then added a few drops of burnt umber ink to the silver ink, and then blotched some dry brushing around again, and it gave a nice mottled appeal and look to the metal. I then cracked out the paints and added some colour to the bits and bobs that I'd placed around, such as like the corrugated iron, the head, the tank shell, etc. I've also placed a few placards on all of the bridges as like a nameplate. I painted those different colours, and my intention is in the future, if we have a particularly memorable moment on one of these bridges in a game, we can rename the bridge after that moment and paint in a little title on it. I also used a toothbrush with different coloured red, all kind of glooped together, not mixed thoroughly, and splashed it around a bit for an effect of goriness. Also, the obligatory bloodied handprints were placed around a few places too. Time to make a wash. Threw together some black ink, some burnt umber ink, both from Liquitex, liquefying medium from Tamyia, some water of course, and then splodged it all over. I then brought back the highlights with a little bit of dry brushing using Vallejo aluminium. While waiting for the dry brush to dry, I cut out a few posters and warmed up my dirty down effects paints. I then got out the dirty down dark rust and highlighted that as well with some yellow rust, just splodging it around wherever. I also used a little bit of moss in the corners and some verdigris in a few spots. I find using the heat gun gives a little bit of extra kick and moves it along. I then afterwards came back in with a wet brush, not dripping, and basically smooched out all the tea staining so it had a nice even finish. I find this is a really important point when you're using these dirty down products. In particular, things like the top of the handrail, etc. that would get high friction, I made sure there was nothing on there and rubbed it all off. Time for the posters. I make a watery mix of matte Mod Podge and Gorilla Glue's PVA wood glue. Once this is thoroughly watered down, I get out the posters I'd cut out earlier and then start to soak them individually and place them. Once placed, it's important to use a wet brush to kind of smooch them into place and make sure that they adhere and conform to the contours of your terrain. It makes all the difference. Afterwards, I get some Vallejo streaking grime and slimy grime and apply them onto the posters to give them a worn look. I then come in with a dripping wet brush and put drops of water all over the streaking grime. I find this method enhances the effect of the streaking grime while not letting it overpower the colour of the posters. It also helps it pool and collect around the edges of the cut posters to hide that clean white line. Another thing about the posters is I find they tend to add a splash of colour to these otherwise quite dark and drab ridges. And 2 coats of Vallejo matte varnish I find finishes it off. What do you think? I think these look pretty good. Let me know down below. And please like and subscribe if you want to see more.